Okay, we're going to get started. Welcome everyone to the PPACG Air Quality Technical Committee meeting on September 25th. I'm going to start off with introductions in the room and via Zoom. My name is Samantha Bailey and I'm an environmental planner for PPACG.
Erica Alanisonga, Schriever Air Force Base.
Brandon Fellner, Fort Carson.
Rich Yellen from Fort Carson.
Jenny Phillips from PPACG.
Marla Lucky, El Paso County Public Health.
Chris Welch, Colorado Springs Utilities.
Monty McVeigh, Air Force Civil Engineering Center.
And those behind us?
Steve Milner, citizen. Yellow Creek, resident of Monty Springs.
Patsy Winder, Transportation Planner, PPACG.
And for those that are joining remotely, we're going to go first come, first serve.
Gordon Pierce and Phil Von Hake with CDPHE.
This is John Hunter with the American Lung Association and Southern Colorado Clean Cities Coalition.
This is Megan Carpenter, also with Southern Colorado Clean Cities Coalition.
We have three more. I see a few folks from CSU. Oh, no, excuse me, from CDPHE. Phil? Well, Phil Von Hock is on the line as well. So thank you everyone for attending. Next on the agenda is public comment for items that are not on the agenda. Hearing none, I am going to switch up slightly the agenda based on our presenter's schedule. So I'd like to start with Gordon Pierce to give an ozone data report from the Department of Public Health and Environment.
Sure, thanks, Samantha. So basically where things stand with Colorado Springs through yesterday, I don't know if people have seen the update that I put out through August 31st, but basically there's very little change since that time. The first through fourth max values at both the Air Force Academy and Manitou Springs sites remain the same. For Academy, if we go to the fifth max, there was a slight change there. We had some higher ozone throughout the whole area, including the Denver area on September 9th. So the fifth max value is now 65. But as it stands now, the fourth max value at the Academy site is 65 parts per billion for this summer, and at Manitou Springs it's 64 parts per billion. When we look at the 3-year averages, we're currently standing for the Air Force Academy of a 3-year average of 69 parts per billion, and at Manitou Springs, 68 parts per billion. So we're both below the 70 part per billion standard at this point in time. Since we're getting out of the summer, we don't anticipate that we're going to see any more high values. So these values are likely to stand for the season. Any questions?
What were the three highest days?
The three highest days that we've seen are June 6th, where we saw 69 ppb at Academy and 70 ppb at Manitou Springs. July 24th was the second max at both sites, where we saw 67 ppb at the Academy and 66 ppb at Manitou. And then it's different dates for the third max, 66 ppb at Academy on August 7th and 64 ppb on June 19th at Manitou. The fourth maxes were both on July 19th, 65 ppb at Academy and 64 ppb at Manitou.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Gordon?
And overall, levels are much lower across our whole network this summer than they were last summer. A lot of it's due to meteorology. Also, we've had very few what we would consider potential exceptional events due to stratospheric ozone intrusions or from wildfire smoke this year, which is nice.
Gordon, this is Chris Welch with Colorado Springs Utilities. I was just curious. I understand this data would still be draft or preliminary, but is this table publicly available at this point that you're presenting right now?
Yes. Yeah, the table I'm pulling from is available on our website.
Samantha has that
So
link.
yeah, Samantha has that link, but you can find it if you go to it's on a subsection under www.colorado.gov/air quality. All is one word, air quality.
I'll send out the hyperlink after this meeting today as well.
Okay, thanks much.
Lee Milner again. Could you just, I don't know if you have it right off the top of your head, but what were the highest readings on other sites, and how many exceedances, like the maximum number of exceedances at the worst site, something like that?
From other sites in the Denver area, or our whole network.
Well, the full yeah.
Is that what you're looking at?
Yeah. Yes. Yes, sir.
We have had, I think I'd have to double check, but I think it's like 19 or 20 days that have exceeded 70 parts per billion this year across all of our network. They're all within the Front Range area. Obviously, none of the sites in Colorado Springs are a part of those numbers.
But have several sites had 4 exceedances? I guess, are they in violation of the standard? I guess is what I'm asking.
Yeah, as far as currently there are, as it stands right now, there's 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 8 sites that we have that are in violation of the 70 part per billion standard. 3 that are in violation of the old 75 part per billion standard.
Okay, thank you.
So the 3 that are in violation of the 75 part per billion standard are our Chatfield site, our Rocky Flats North site, and our NREL site. So all in the Denver area.
Any more questions or comments for Gordon? Hearing none, we'll go on to the next agenda item. Thank you so much, Gordon.
Sure.
Next, we have Phil Fank from CDPHE, and he's going to give a presentation on the recently passed zero-emission vehicle rule. Phil, can you hear us?
I think Phil was just actually heading back to his office quickly, so he should be there in a second.
Okay.
Hi, Samantha. I just unmuted myself.
No problem. Hi, Phil.
And how long do I have for this presentation?
20 minutes plus 10 for questions.
Oh, yeah.
Great.
Yeah. I should be able to do it in that.
Cool.
So, great. Thank you. And hello, everybody. I apologize I'm not there in person today. I haven't been in the Springs in a while, but things are just so busy back here. I only have time to call in. And also, I'm only on the phone. I'm not on a computer. Samantha, do you have my presentation up?
I do.
Great. So I'll blow through these first couple of slides knowing that you're a much more knowledgeable group on air quality issues than most of my audiences. So I'll go through these. So then the next slide, that Colorado's air quality is getting better and worse. I don't have nearly the level of detail that Gordon has, just very generally in the Denver Metro and North Front Range areas, our ozone, you see the general trend line over the last 20 years is going down slightly, but it's still far above the EPA levels for attainment. As far as Colorado Springs goes, they're bouncing around just above and just below that 70 parts per billion number. So ozone problem is much less of an issue down there than it is up here. Next slide, please. And with the better and worse, you know, the general reasons why we have much better pollution control technologies and energy efficiency technologies, but there are so many more people moving into this area and so much more business and industrial activity happening that it's sort of canceling out the effects of the efficiency of individual sources. Next slide, please. And then, as you may have seen in the Gazette back in July, that there were ozone alerts in El Paso County, and that there could be a reclassification of an attainment soon. That's the EPA's call and not ours. But next slide, please. And then if you see the map of Colorado, there's the blue area, Denver Metro and North Front Range, that is still in non-attainment and soon to be in serious non-attainment. And Colorado Springs is an attainment, but it's called a maintenance area that they're just keeping an eye on the ozone levels there. Next slide, please. And then moving from ozone to greenhouse gases, CDPHE just in June or July, I believe, released its latest greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And this pie chart was taken from that inventory, and notice that transportation is the single biggest slice of the pie as far as our projections go, emissions by sector. That's only a slightly bigger piece of the pie than the one right above it, electric power. But knowing that our electric power mix is moving from coal to natural gas, and then very soon moving again from natural gas to renewables, that slice of the pie will get smaller. It remains to be seen whether or not the transportation slice of the pie gets bigger or smaller. Next slide, please. Sorry, I haven't had a chance to turn this into a more visual graph, but just notice the numbers in the red circle are so much larger than all of the other numbers below it as far as where transportation emissions are coming from. They're coming from passenger cars and light-duty trucks. When people think about, big rigs belching black smoke going down the highway, that is a contributor to the greenhouse gas problem in Colorado, but not nearly as big a contributor as light-duty vehicles that you and I are driving. Next slide, please. So as you might know, in the CDPHE Air Quality Control Division, we do a bunch of different things like those notifications with the yellow, green, orange updates that Gordon's group puts out every day. We manage stationary source pollutants like the Comanche Power Plant in east of Pueblo. We manage oil and gas operations like you see there. We also work on indoor air quality statewide. Next slide, please. I work in the mobile sources program, which is strictly about vehicle emissions. Next slide, please. The first two pictures on this slide do not apply to El Paso County. The Air Care Colorado Emissions Inspection Program doesn't go any further south than Castle Rock, but we manage individual tailpipe emissions through that program between Castle Rock and Fort Collins Greeley. One thing to be sure of when you see the check engine light come on your car dashboard, that means that your car is now emitting 1.5 times as much pollution as it was designed to emit. So as far as we're concerned, those cars are broken and need repair in order to be in emissions compliance and get their registration renewed. With VW, we were very lucky 4 years ago to have $68 million drop in our laps, much of which is going to zero emission vehicle, the vehicles and the charging infrastructure. We've also done some renewable natural gas projects with that money. And then the one thing that is statewide is our smoking vehicle hotline. If you see a coal roller like this, we encourage you to get its license plate number, Colorado license plate only, and report it into our hotline there, and we'll send a notice asking them to voluntarily make repairs to that vehicle. We know they probably won't do it, but at least they now know that they're on our radar. So that's our day job in the Mobile Sources program. But next slide, please. For the last year and a half, we've been all about LEV and ZEV, low and zero emission vehicle standards. Next slide, please. I'll blow through this timeline because you probably know most of it, that California has been doing air quality before anybody else in the country in the 60s. Then in 1970, the U.S. Clean Air Act took effect, and Section 177 of that act provides a waiver for California to use stricter standards than the federal standards. Those standards were set to merge as of vehicle model year 2025, but then that changed in 2017, where the SAFE Act was introduced that would freeze the federal standards at model year 2020 levels, which would be slightly lower than the current levels, but definitely higher than the California emissions levels. And as you heard last week, EPA actually did officially revoke California's waiver to set stricter standards than the federal standards. They sued that very same day. So the TBD means that the courts will decide whether there is one national standard or whether the same 177 standard that's been in place for about 50 years can continue. And our general rule has been that there can be no third car. Colorado is just not a big enough vehicle market for automakers to set up a third assembly line so those vehicles meet Colorado-specific vehicle standards. We have to choose federal or California 177 standards. Next slide, please. So with the low emission vehicle standard that took up most of our time last year, Governor Hickenlooper issued that executive order in June of last year to maintain progress on clean vehicles. That was a low emission vehicle standard, but not a zero emission vehicle rule. You see how the sides lined up for and against those rules, and we had a pretty robust stakeholder process. Next slide, please. The rulemaking hearing took place for the Colorado Air Quality Control Commission back in November of last year, and they unanimously adopted the Colorado Low Emission Automobile Regulation, or CLEAR, among our air quality regulations. That is regulation number 20. And I thought the single biggest takeaway from that hearing, when the 8 commissioners voted on it, at least 2 of them said, I don't like this rule, but I like what the EPA did even less. And then they voted yes to adopt the rule. The Colorado Auto Dealers Association has been the single largest opponent to this process, and they challenged that rule. That case got dismissed, but there's now an appeal that's pending, so we'll wait and see what happens. The courts will decide on that as well. But for right now, with the LEV rule in place, as of model year 2022, every new light duty vehicle, which is 8,500 pounds or less, or medium duty vehicle, 14,000 pounds or less, sold in Colorado must meet the California 177 state low emission vehicle standards. And next slide, please. So when you see the map of the U.S., that made Colorado at the end of 2018 a LEV state, but not yet a ZEV state. And that is significant for a couple of reasons that you'll see on the next slide. I thought this article in the Colorado Springs Gazette from May of 2018 was interesting, in that Subaru, which is pretty much the unofficial state car of Colorado. Does have a plug-in hybrid, part gas, part electric, but lots of electric-only range on it. Perfect for driving clean into the mountains and doing your thing with bike riding, camping, whatever. This car is officially available in Colorado, but realistically, they only make enough of them to sell in the existing ZEV states, the ones that are in orange on that previous map I showed you. It would take a bunch of extra effort, extra shipping costs, etc., to get a Subaru plug-in hybrid in Colorado, as long as Colorado is not a ZEV state. Next slide, please. So when we had our initial hearings for the ZEV rule, usually a very cut and dry affair with only professionals in the room, and all of a sudden our meeting room was inundated with hundreds of people from all over the state saying, we want to see Colorado adopt ZEV and ZEV. The commission took notice, and they said, as soon as you're done with the ZEV rule, we want you to get to work on a ZEV rule. And then in January, the first executive order that Governor Polis signed did call for a ZEV rule. It didn't make any changes to the work we had already been doing, but it was just nice that the new governor had our backs on this. And CDPHE had nothing to do with the negotiations you see with automakers at the bottom of this slide, but through the first half of this year, the two trade associations that represent 99% of the world's automakers negotiated with the Colorado Department of Transportation and the Colorado Energy Office on trying to avoid a ZEV rule altogether for Colorado, but in return, bringing all available models of ZEV, like the Subaru hybrid, to Colorado as soon as next year, get credit for early sales, things like that. And those negotiations sort of panned out, as you'll see in the next slide or two. So next slide. The ZEV rule is about credits and not cars. The credits are based on how far an individual vehicle can go on zero emission range. So a pure electric car with 200 or 300 miles of range, like a Tesla or a Chevrolet Bolt, those can get 3 or 4 credits under this scheme. And a plug-in hybrid, like that Subaru or like a Chevy Volt, those kind of things, those get 1/2 of 1 credit. So when you add up those credits, our estimates translate roughly into automakers needing to sell at least 5% zero-emission vehicles out of their total sales in model year 2023, going up to at least 6% ZEV in model year 2030. And to give you some baseline data, the auto dealers reported that in 2018, zero-emission vehicles made up 2.5% of their total sales. So they are already, and that was double the 2017 number. The 2017 number was double the 2016 number. So they are already well on their way to hitting 5% easily as of 2023. Next slide, please. So auto dealers and a few other groups had their various points of opposition to a Colorado ZEV rule, and there's all kernels of truth in all of these, but I want to skip to the next slide, please, because when I'm doing these ZEV updates, I have to do a lot of myth busting, and the biggest ones are about consumer choice. First of all, these rules, the ZEV and ZEV rules, take no vehicles off the road, and they do not force anybody to buy a zero-emission vehicle. It actually increases customer choice instead of limits it. Think that Subaru plug-in hybrid finally coming to Colorado. The rules apply primarily to automakers, indirectly to auto dealers, and even more indirectly to consumers. We recognize, just the way the rulemaking process happens, that this is a statewide rule, but we totally expect automakers to hit their 5%, 6% minimums through sales up and down the I-25 corridor and maybe a little up into the I-70 corridor, but we absolutely do not expect, say, a farmer in Springfield to have to buy a Tesla and then drive 100 miles to the nearest supercharger. We do not expect that to have to happen, and it does not have to happen in order to make these rules work. And going back to some of those points of opposition on the previous slide, there are kernels of truth in those points of opposition, and they're definitely true in 2019, but as we said repeatedly, through the rulemaking process, we encourage people to think 2023 and not 2019. You've already seen the kind of disruption that's come to the automobile industry over the last 5 years. The next 5 years, we expect to see at least as much disruption. Next slide, please. So going to our pollution reductions, and this is statewide, with the ZEV rule, which will apply to every new light and medium duty vehicle sold as of model year 2022, we expect that to prevent 30 million tons of greenhouse gases from going into our air. The ozone reductions don't really matter because federal and the California 177 ozone rules are close enough together that we didn't really see much of a difference. And on the ZEV rule, we expect to see an additional 3.2 million tons of greenhouse gases prevented from being emitted and 307 tons of ozone precursors prevented once a ZEV rule would go into effect. Next slide, please. When we did our economic analysis, we found that green really is green. With the ZEV rule, we do recognize that the additional pollution controls on each vehicle could raise the price of each individual vehicle by about $1,000. But over the life of that vehicle, and we used a time frame of 15 years or 150,000 miles for a vehicle life, over the life of a ZEV vehicle, we can see a net savings of $3,000 in lower fuel costs and lower maintenance costs. And that difference is even more stark with a ZEV rule. Obviously, electric vehicles, zero-emission vehicles cost more than a comparable internal combustion vehicle. Our average for 2023 is $6,000 more. But you may have been hearing about the coming cost parity between, say, a Tesla 3 and an equivalent internal combustion engine vehicle. A lot of market research shows that cost parity coming as soon as 2025. We took the conservative end of that range and expect to see cost parity between the two in 2028. So it would cost you no more and maybe even a little less to drive a zero-emission vehicle off the lot as of model year 2028. And over the life of the vehicle, when you're paying pennies per kilowatt hour of electricity versus dollars per gallon of gasoline, and also, as any current EV drivers know, when I've asked them, what kind of maintenance do you have on an electric vehicle? And they look at each other and go, none. You do have to change the tires, you have to change the wiper blades, but that's about it. So by the year 2030, over the life of a vehicle, we could see net savings of $10,000 or more of ZEV over internal combustion vehicle. Next slide. You may have noticed the asterisk next to costs. These are all retail costs that we used in our analyses. These do not include any of the tax credits or other incentives that make Colorado one of the best states in the union to buy an electric vehicle. So the saving could be even more stark when you factor in the tax credits and other incentives available. Next slide, please. So we had our ZEV rulemaking hearing again here at CDPHE back in mid-August. Excuse me. CDPHE proposed the standard zero-emission vehicle rule to our commission, and then right after that, CDOT and the Energy Office got together and proposed an alternative ZEV rule that was exactly like ours, except it included these two options that they came up with after they had those negotiations with the automaker groups. And the first option is about a proportional transfer where these automakers already have credits in the bank from either selling ZEVs or buying ZEV credits in the other ZEV states, California and the other 10 or so ZEV states that have already been doing this for 10, 20 years. They can use a proportion of that to cover their ZEV requirements in Colorado for the first 3 model years when ZEV takes effect in Colorado as of 2023, or for those companies that already do have ZEVs available for sale, like Tesla, Chevy, Nissan, Ford, Subaru. They can get early action credits if they start making more of those vehicles available for sale in Colorado as soon as model year 2021, which is actually January of 2020. The model year runs 1 year ahead of the actual calendar year. So thanks to this alternative rule, we could see a greater number and variety of zero-emission vehicles available for sale in Colorado as soon as next year. Next slide, please. So, like I said, the automakers negotiated with CDOT and CEO, and once they came up with that alternative ZEV rule, they got up and testified in support of this alternative ZEV rule, which is the first time the automakers have ever supported a state adopting a ZEV rule. And the day before the rulemaking hearing, we had several hundred people come through to provide their 2 or 3 minutes apiece of public comment on the rule, and that was over 95% in favor of Colorado becoming a ZEV state. The commission definitely took notice of that. They wanted to make sure that details of that public support was included in their final report. And when the opponents like the auto dealers, the Freedom to Drive Coalition that you may have heard about, the fuel providers, etc., when the commission asked any of those parties for actual evidence of increased costs or other dire consequences as a result of Colorado becoming a ZEV state, they really did not come up with anything other than just don't do it. So the commission was not swayed, and they ended up voting 8-1 to adopt the alternative ZEV rule. Next slide, please. I'll leave this up for a couple of seconds. All 5 of these groups put out a joint press release, and you know what State of Colorado said. I just want you to see what each of the 2 major trade associations said about this alternative ZEV rule for Colorado. Alliance of Auto Manufacturers represents mostly American automakers, and Global Automakers represents mostly European and Japanese automakers. Toyota is in both groups, and I believe Tesla is in neither of them. So, next slide, please. Just 2 weeks ago, we submitted, or soon after August, we submitted the official adopted alternative ZEV rule to the Colorado Secretary of State. They reviewed it and officially added it to the Colorado Code of Regulations, I believe 2 weeks ago. It needs to be on the books for 2 years per the Clean Air Act. And as of January 2nd, 2022, the rule takes effect, and every automaker wanting to do business in Colorado needs to sell an increasing percentage of their light-duty fleet, 8,500 pounds or less, as zero emission. And going back to our regulatory analysis, we expect that to be roughly at least 5% ZEV in 2023, going up to at least 6% in 2030. Next slide, please. The only specific numbers in the California ZEV rule go to 2025. So somewhere in 2025, 5/2030, California and the 177 states, they already have a stakeholder group that Colorado has just joined. They will get back together to decide whether to continue the ZEV rule, whether to bump up the percentages more, how to work on the credits, etc. And as you know from last week, the EPA revoked this waiver. California sued immediately. So now it's in the hands of the courts to see where this rule goes. But as far as Colorado goes, we are proceeding as we've said with setting up a ZEV program, a LEV program that starts in 2022, and a ZEV program that starts in 2023. Next slide, please. So being in the program that tracks Colorado's mobile sources of emissions, the main thing we work on is cleaner cars, and I'm very lucky that my boss and our program manager also lets me work on fewer cars. I still love this article from the Atlantic a couple years ago. That headline says it all. Next slide, please. And I admit that this table I came up with is still mostly Denver-based. I don't know if Colorado Springs has Lime scooters or anything like that yet, but it is proving to be an effective micromobility option. I don't want to force it on anybody, but it is one worth looking at. And SOV at the top of this chart is single occupant vehicle. This assumes gas powered. And going back to that absurd primacy article, it is convenient, definitely. The whole system is set up around it, but these are all the other things that you're trading for the sake of convenience. EVs and zero emission vehicles definitely have an advantage on regular single occupant vehicles powered by gas or diesel. They definitely have an advantage on clean air, but if you're driving alone, it's the same as a gas powered car. And then there's taxi, Uber, Lyft, etc. That's sort of a wash. Car and van pools better, scooters better, and then my three favorites are telework. Now that Google and virtual private networks have made working from home or working off-site meetings like this much more feasible. Transit, I was looking forward to taking the Mustang down to Colorado Springs for the first time today, but it didn't work. Still, I've heard nothing but rave reviews about the Mustang statewide, and it's expanding to more and more parts of the state, including the rural parts. And then my favorite zero emission vehicle is biking and then walking, obviously. Next slide, please. Sorry, what slide do you have up right now?
Your contact information.
Oh, good. So I'm done. So thank you very much for listening. I'll answer any questions you might have and go back through something I may have done too quickly. And please do call or email me back if you have any questions you want to take offline, and search on LEV or ZEV at our website to find more details about our stakeholder and rulemaking process. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Any questions or comments for those that are in the room right now?
I'd like Phil to look into his crystal ball and see how he thinks the courts are possibly going to rule on this.
I'm sorry. Could you pretty much eat the mic and start over? I can't hear too well.
Hey there, Phil. Robin Iser here. Phil, if you could look into your crystal ball and make some prediction about how you think this rollback by the EPA is going to go and how long you think it's going to take.
Well, all of that is far above my pay grade, far above Governor Polis's pay grade, and really right now it is in the hands of the courts. California does have a pretty good track record of defending their 177 record over the last 50 years, and it's, on the political side of things, it's a very interesting scrambling over the argument over states' rights that the current EPA seems to be, wanting to impose one national standard in favor of letting states decide for themselves. So that'll probably be one of the main arguments happening through at least two different court cases because there will be a, I think, federal court case, and the loser of that case is virtually guaranteed to appeal to the Court of Appeals. The loser of that case is virtually guaranteed to appeal it to the Supreme Court. So I don't even want to venture a guess on how many years it might take. But like I said, Colorado is proceeding with setting up a LEV and ZEV program. California has already said that they are proceeding as before with maintaining their LEV and ZEV programs, as are all the individual 177 states from that map with the orange states that I showed earlier. And I believe California has, I think, a total of 23 states, which is almost double the number of actual 177 states that there are, signed on to California's lawsuit. So it's about the auto market is pretty split pretty evenly between states that want to adopt the California 177 standards, or at least allow that to keep going, and states that just want the one federal standard. But I'm sorry, I have no clue on how long this will take.
Thank you.
Sure.
Phil, hi, Andy Gunning with PPACG. Thanks for the presentation, really good information. Appreciate the fulsome report. Two questions for you. One, you had a slide about the greenhouse gas emissions savings with LEV and ZEV, and I'm curious, is that net of where and how the ZEV vehicles are powered? Meaning, if you've got a traditional internal combustion engine with tailpipe emissions, is that's dirtier, if you will, than, say, a ZEV that's plugging into a grid that's powered by coal for now? What does the science say? Is there a way to kind of just say what the rule of thumb is on that? And
Thank you for that. Thank you, especially for asking that question. I was not involved in our specific regulatory analysis, but folks in our group who were, I know for a fact that they studied the Colorado grid, where it is now and where it's going over the next decade. And the general takeaway we had is that, yes, I think even in the first year of a ZEV program going into effect in Colorado, there's a possibility that because Colorado still has a pretty heavily coal-fired electric grid, greenhouse gas emissions in that first year might stay the same or even go up a bit if we have a bunch of electric vehicles plugging into a coal-fired grid. But that will change quickly and significantly as more of those coal-fired plants are getting shut down and being replaced with natural gas plants, and then renewable plants in addition to or after that. Xcel Energy, I know that's not the El Paso utility, but Xcel Energy has already said that by 2025, they expect to be 55% renewable energy powered, and they expect to close 2 of their coal-fired power plants at that same time by 2025, 10 years ahead of schedule. They're going to take the write-off in construction costs because coal-fired electricity is so uneconomical these days. I know Tri-State, that handles most of the rural areas of Colorado's electricity, is making a pretty aggressive switch from coal to electricity. I don't remember the details of Colorado Springs Utilities, but I know at least one rep is there to talk about how much cleaner their grid could be over the next decade. And once again, we do expect a majority of ZEVs in Colorado to be in urban suburban areas, that's much of which is served by Xcel Energy. So that played a big factor in our regulatory analysis about emissions going down by a cleaner grid recharging the electricity in zero tailpipe emission vehicles. Does that answer your question?
Okay, yeah, it's complicated. Yeah, I get it. But yeah, appreciate that.
Right. You said you had a second question, too.
Yeah, so this shifting gears a little bit, and this may be out of your wheelhouse a little bit, and I get that the state is incentivizing ZEV use. And say if I buy a Tesla in 2023, the GAP project under construction on I-25 is going to be open, and I don't think you would pay a toll on that in that section if you're driving a zero emissions vehicle, if the bill that was proposed last year passed. And obviously, ZEV vehicles aren't paying a fuel tax as well, which is the primary source of revenue for state transportation needs. But was there any discussion about how to deal with that? One of the things we deal with at PPACG as well is transportation planning and just seeing a huge shortfall in state investment on the state system and interstate system. And as the numbers go up, it's good news, bad news. It's great for the environment that we're going to see more ZEVs on the road, but there's even less revenue that's coming into transportation to meet our extraordinary demands. But was there any talk about having something to supplant or pay a differing fee by ZEV and LEV owners?
Yes, thank you for asking.
Sure.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, that was it.
So thank you for asking that, too. If there's one thing the LEV and ZEV process has helped us realize is that our transportation system is far, far too dependent on the gas tax, which has not been raised in over a quarter of a century. But that executive order that Governor Polis signed in January of this year had 4 parts to it. One of them was create a ZEV rule, and at least one other part, and I don't have the exact executive order and the directives in it, but at least one of the other directives in that order directed CDOT to explore additional funding mechanisms so the lower gas tax from more electric vehicles being on the road does not factor in to reduce revenue as much as it would. Does that make sense? That they are exploring other ways. Currently, every electric vehicle registered in Colorado has to pay, I think it's $50 a year to make up for the absence of gas tax that they'd be collecting on that vehicle. And I know there are various efforts underway, not only in Colorado, but in every other state, to increase the amount that electric vehicles have to pay either as a one-time charge or as an annual charge to make up for the absence of gas tax collection. Does that answer that question?
Okay, yeah, that does. Appreciate that. That makes sense. Yeah, gas tax was raised last time in 1991, I think. So it has a purchasing power of like 45% today than it had back then. One thing we're interested in pursuing is something like a road usage charge, which is based on vehicle miles of travel and when you travel and which routes and if they're congested or not. So that sounds like that's maybe in sync with what CDOT's direction was as well.
Do you mean like what's already happening in Oregon?
Yes. And the thought...
Yeah, I know CDOT.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
And the thought being that if you have folks driving ZEVs that are already pretty well connected, I think, in terms of data and travel characteristics and things like that, that might be a willing constituency to try out something like this as a pilot kind of project. Because there's a lot of concerns about data privacy with going toward a solution like that. But if you have a willing built-in constituency, folks that drive ZEVs already, maybe that's a good place to try out a system like that.
Yes, that's an excellent point. And I know CDOT is interested. They have had folks from Oregon here a couple years ago to explore that charge per mile option. And I don't know anything about whether or not Colorado or CDOT is working on anything like that specifically, but that's absolutely one of the many things they're looking at to replace the gas tax revenue that would inevitably be going down as a result of LEV and ZEV going in.
Okay.
But thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, that's good. That's promising. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Any more questions or comments in the room for Phil? Hearing none, are there any questions for the folks that are on via Zoom? Hearing none, I thought that was a great presentation, so thank you so much, Phil. Is it okay if I send out your PowerPoint to our committee members?
I hope you do. Thank you.
Great.
And I have to jump off the line now, but please do follow up with me directly if anyone has any other questions about either of these rules.
Great.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, I'm taking a bow. Thank you. Take care.
All right, next on the agenda is a presentation from Yarek. He's going to show us his Manitou Springs air quality app.
So you might remember me. I've been coming to this group for the last few months, and I'm a resident of Manitou Springs, Colorado. We have one of the area sensors, ozone sensors, is located in Colorado, in Manitou Springs. And for the last few months, I've been trying to go and find the data related to ozone levels and kind of go through the process of determining what is the overall air quality kind of condition in our area. And what I found is that it was somewhat difficult to find online resources that would provide the data easy to analyze over time, especially over time. So you can go and find lots of online resources that present everything in a tabular form. You have tables. Sometimes you can go and see the data for a particular day, hour by hour. And then someone interested in ozone level would have to know exactly what 70 parts per billion means here in this particular case. But the question is, what would happen if we wanted to see this data over time, since the beginning of the year or maybe over the summer months? We've heard earlier today that on one occasion this year, Manitou Springs recorded at least once 8-hour moving average value was higher than 70 parts per billion, or actually it was 70 parts per billion. What if you wanted to find out where this type of value happened to be? Therefore, there was born an idea that perhaps it would be beneficial to build something of a dashboard that would go and collect the ozone type of data from sensors, or one particular sensor in this particular case, and display this data in form of charts to the public and anyone interested for everyone to see and analyze. And this is the application and dashboard that I was able to build over the course of the summer with 2 internship students who couldn't be here today. One of them was from Pikes Peak Community College, one from UCCS. And we together decided to go and write a software that goes and collects the data that is publicly available on Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment website, again in form of tables. We collect this data, we store this data, and we make it available via this dashboard. And 2 particular charts on this dashboard will tell you pretty clearly, hopefully, the story where we are with ozone levels. Current ozone levels can be seen on this first chart, gauge chart, at the top. So this data, latest data, was collected at noon today. And you can see there is a value 55 parts per billion. This gauge chart displays, again, the raw value, not 8-hour moving average. I've got the feedback from Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. They reviewed this dashboard. They liked it. They acknowledged that the data was correct. But yet they proposed a few changes to this dashboard, and one of them was that instead of displaying raw data on this gauge chart, they would prefer to display their 8-hour moving average, which I will do. Why not? This is exactly what they use in their process of verifying if we are in a zone kind of healthy levels or not. They also propose changing the color breakpoints to align it more with air quality index. All in all, this gauge chart will allow you to see the latest data from this one particular location from Manitou Springs, Colorado. For now, this dashboard application is integrated only with one location, Manitou Springs. If I have a indication that it would be beneficial to extend this application and provide some sort of drop-down type of list of different local other censored locations like U.S. Air Force Academy or perhaps some other locations, we could add it here. We could extend this application and provide data for the other monitoring sites. And finally, the lower part, when we scroll Samantha down a little bit, lower part is the time series chart that shows us the ozone levels, again, for Manitou monitor, since the beginning of June 2019. We could load more data. For now, I loaded it for the last few months, but I want to draw your attention to one particular data point that we were talking earlier about. This is what is happening for the last 3-4 days. When we use one of the sliders down below and go to the very left, Samantha, actually this slider here. Yes, if you scroll it to the very left, just go as far as you can see data for the last few months. I want to draw your attention here, and can we, Samantha, scroll this slider much closer so this data and viewport changes for it, and we can go even further. Okay, and that would be it. If you click for me this time series here, we hide by clicking this all 3 hourly reads. Just click on this particular icon here. We'll hide here the raw data, and what we are left with is 8-hour moving average data. And if you now put your mouse and hover over this area, we can see clearly a little bit to the right, slightly to the right. Yes, it's very sensitive, but actually this very point is 70 parts per billion. So this is exactly the point that was mentioned earlier that was recorded as one of those that we exceeded this maximum allowable 70 parts per billion. But again, this is the only one so far that I can see based on this data analysis. Perhaps if we loaded more data from the beginning of the year, we can see a little bit more. We could load the data for the last few years. This depends on the needs of the public and perhaps the value that everyone could use and find it. In addition to these charts, I intend for this dashboard to be also the platform where we can include more educational type of information. So those tabs, really dashboard, all 3 info, they don't contain necessarily yet any information about what may contribute to ozone levels, high ozone levels, what could be done to reduce them. My idea is to really provide more information of this kind on this website, make it available to the public. There are improvements that I would like to make to this application. Please see me afterwards if you have any suggestions how this application could be improved. Perhaps adding another location like U.S. Air Force Academy. Perhaps loading the data, not all of it at once, but maybe last month, and provide user with criteria like type of from to, and letting the user specify the time range for the data to be retrieved to analyze could be useful. Perhaps downloading this entire chart. I can provide this option very easily out of the box. So this is all available. Let me know what you think about this. I hope you find value in those things. And I know that the students that I work with, they became not only interested in software engineering by building this application with me, but also in ozone data, and find it very useful to know that the academic world somewhat wants to be part of it.
Any questions in the room for Jarek? Any online? Okay. Hearing none, like he mentioned, if you have any ideas or feedback, feel free to let him know. I can also send out your email address for those that aren't able to attend or that are on Zoom that would like to reach out to Yarrick. Thank you very much.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. Next on the agenda.
If I may add
oh, yeah.
one thing. Yes, this application is available to the public. It is on the internet. You can find the link under this point number 4. You can go and follow this link, and you can see this data being updated automatically every 1 hour, actually 5 minutes after the hour. Because we receive our data exactly on an hour, and this application goes and retrieves and updates the data 5 minutes after.
I'll be sure to send out the dashboard link to the committee members as well. All right, next on the agenda, this is something that I posted for us to have a discussion about. Next week is already October, which is crazy to me, so I usually take this time of the year to start planning for upcoming projects. Thinking about this committee and how I want it to be its most effective and proactive. I sent all to you, I think this morning, kind of a proposed I don't know if structure is the word, but efforts that I would like us to look forward to for 2020. I'll do a brief overview. We don't have to go through the whole thing, but I did send out the document. Let's see. So some of these proposals came from our original bylaws. So one thing that has changed when it comes to the committee is rather than meeting every month or every other month, I would have this committee meet quarterly. I would involve more memberships, which includes representatives from our regional jurisdictions, industry reps, the military installations, government officials. And with this group, I see this as more of sort of like an advisory group, or we can remain it as is with our technical committee, where we inform members of current concerns and issues, advise PPACG on those concerns and issues, inform members of current air quality related projects, and then aid in the development of a regional air quality plan. Now that comes in conjunction with 4 work groups that I have proposed. Each work group would meet more regularly than the overall technical committee. One work group is outreach and education, data review, stakeholders, and a policy work group. For outreach and education, this work group would meet to discuss current concerns and issues, and then discuss strategies on how to inform and educate the public on those concerns and issues. I just kind of laid out a number of people that I think would be really good representatives for this group. That doesn't necessarily mean that these work groups have to have each one of these representatives. I think I feel that up to 5 to 8 people on these work groups may be beneficial, just to have enough members on the table and the right people at the table for outreach and education. So I included school district representatives, so doing education to our youth in the region. Public health representatives, so taking air quality from the public health perspective and how do we reach out to those, not only everyone, but to those that are sensitive with respiratory issues. Local meteorologists, I believe back in June or July we had some groups come to one of our Aqtc meetings and had a great interest in presenting air quality data to their weather reports. Communication specialists, universities. Colorado Springs is Olympic City, USA, and they have a great interest in the air quality in the region because it impacts their performance as well. For data review, these would be data analysts that would assist not only myself when it comes to reporting out to our PPACG board, but then working with the committee and these work groups on current trends and data analysis, specifically with ozone, but we can also look at the other pollutants as well. Discuss potential projects if they see ongoing trends, strategies for high ozone days, collaborate with other work groups and PPACG, and then report out to the committee as well. CDPHE being owners of that data, I see would be really involved. Data analysis, like Yarrick, that would be great, especially with his app. That would be really helpful. Students and professors from local universities, and of course the military installations. Next are stakeholders. So this group would be business owners, Colorado Springs utilities, environmental nonprofits, transportation representatives. They would come together and discuss the impacts of the potential of going into non-attainment, the potential of high ozone days to their industry and organization. And then the last one, which would be a huge help to me as well, is our policy work group. So I kind of see this as the emergency preparedness group for the potential of us going into non-attainment. So this group would research and discuss non-attainment efforts, projects to remain in compliance, collaborate with groups like RAC or Dr. Cog in Denver that have worked in non-attainment standing, as well as collaborate with other work groups. And here I see government representatives, environmental nonprofits, students and professors, and transportation representatives as well. So I wanted to present this to you today, and I'm open to any questions, comments, feedbacks. I just wanted your reaction as to if you feel if this is an effective way to move forward for 2020, or if you see a different structure that may be more proactive and effective for this group. And if there is none, you can always let me know. Oh, there's Lee. Okay.
I'm going to follow the rules here. Let's see, which is that one? Which one? Now, is that it? I would argue, not to be too flip, but a little bit flip perhaps, I would argue that stakeholders also include everyone who breathes the air. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or feedback?
Well, I think our plan is...
Hunter here. I just want to add, I think these are pretty logical breakouts for the different groups. I think it covers a lot of the different areas that make sense to really dig deep into, and seems like a good way of doing it.
Thank you, John.
And this is really just our first shot at trying to figure out how to move forward with the committee's work. We kind of got up quickly, and we're scrambling this year, trying to do what we could to raise awareness and get organized and all that good stuff. We are going to have, I don't know if you've talked about this already or if it's coming up later, but CDPHE is going to come down and brief our board at their meeting on October 9th and just talk about how we made out this year, basically the similar overview that Gordon gave, but maybe a little more detail. And that'll kind of open the door for us to talk about next steps as well with our board. Maybe not, we're not going to hammer it all out at the October meeting, but in subsequent months, we've got some time now that we've got the summer season behind us. We've got some time to figure out how we get organized for next year and come up with a pretty solid work plan. And our board's been super interested in the work that this committee's been doing and what's going on the horizon with ozone, so it definitely has their full attention. So this is just our first shot. Samantha and I talked about this. We thought this would be a good way to kind of break out our work and get some more buy-in and more support from other folks in the community. So we'll talk more about it and maybe try to get this nailed down in the next couple of months, maybe by the end of this year. Okay.
Samantha. May I make a comment? Yes.
I'm Robin Iser. I'm a representative with the Beyond Coal initiative, sponsored through the local Sierra Club and the National Sierra Club. How long has this group been meeting? Less than a year?
Yeah, January, we got directed.
Just less than a year. I think going to quarterly meetings is a little premature. I would suggest perhaps every other month, and I think it's a very good suggestion to break out into these work groups, because really, you know, this is for a report out kind of situation to learn and to also discuss what's currently going on, to have the input of the work groups, I think, and have people working outside of the meetings is very, very helpful. But I think you lose momentum when you go to quarterly meetings at this early in the game with a group coming together. That would be my input.
Thank you.
Samantha, I just had a question, because I've seen this used both ways. Was your intention for bi-monthly for the work groups to be twice a month or every other month?
Sorry, every other month.
Okay,
But
thank
I also
you.
wrote down as needed, depending on projects that
Perfect.
these groups want to take on. Yeah. Anyone on Zoom, questions or comments? Okay. Well, we'll keep this discussion going forward. I'll be sure to, at least via email, try to gather your feedback and thoughts. If you have any membership groups that I might be missing, or if you feel like I'm missing even an entirely different focus group, I'd love to hear that. So I'll definitely keep this conversation going. So thank you for those people that participated. Next on the agenda, status of public outreach and awareness activities. So I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk about what PPACG has been doing in regards to ozone. I believe at the last meeting we talked about social media. So really we've been posting on our Facebook and Instagram pages Action Day posts, so informing the public as to what has been going on when it's an Action Day alert. Thankfully that hasn't happened in quite a while, and I don't think we'll have to do that going forward. And then we also posted videos from local community members. The most recent one, I believe, was from Commissioner Cami Bremer of El Paso County. She has a child that's oxygen dependent. So she did a quick 30-second video just showing her son and why clean air is important to her and her family. I can easily send those links out to you after this meeting so you can see the videos. What I have going on next, aside from doing 2020 committee planning, but going to do an annual data trends report, so working with CDPHE to do an overall regional air quality report on all 6 pollutants, not just ozone. And then my predecessor, he did a 5-year data trends report as well. The last one he did was 2013. So in conjunction with the annual year-end report, I'll also be putting out a 5-year report. I hope to have that to you for review in January. I would love to do a quick round robin. CDPHE, as Andy mentioned earlier, is doing a presentation to our board on October 9th in regards to air quality, and they're also interested to hear what the region is doing when it comes to Action Day alerts. So I will start to our left. And if you've done nothing at all, just say pass, that's fine.
Hi, this is Rich from Fort Carson, and we've had a few initiatives based upon these meetings. One's been an ongoing process on Fort Carson where we have environmental protection officers attend a course every about 6 weeks. And we've really built up kind of our ozone section to get the awareness through the installations, because that representative represents down to the lowest unit, if you will, on Fort Carson, and then the word gets spread from that environmental protection officers throughout the organization. We hope to things they can do at the user level, whether it's at home with the filling up your vehicle after dark or mowing the grass, those things we've talked about several times. So that's something we've kind of made a little bit more robust. We've also we have a large following for Facebook. We attempted to take that ozone action alert and put it to work through our own Facebook page to reach those folks directly. And that proved to be a little bit challenging because our public affairs office needs a little bit of a planning time for that. So we had a couple successes in getting those things posted and put onto Facebook with some comments. but we're going to be later meeting in preparation for next ozone year on how we can maybe streamline that process of posting those alerts to our own page and still pointing to PPACG's website.
Thank you.
I think I received a few emails maybe earlier on with the first ones of the season and then didn't get emails. So my question had actually been, was there a direct mechanism from you guys communicating it to your partners? So you can answer that first.
Yeah, and no, I didn't know if it was really redundant because I don't know if your organization signs up for Ozone Action Days alert, that if you get that alert plus my Facebook page plus an email from me, if that was too much. So I don't know if that would be something to discuss now or for our next meeting, but how to stay informed with Action Day alerts if you're looking towards PPACG to do that, or if you kind of want to take your own roles with that as well.
So that would be a great question for me to bring back to our communications team, and that was also my feedback for, I think, this outreach and education work group is the best place for me in public health. However, I have zero communications function in my agency, so I really need someone from that team to participate in that conversation. And I do think that when they have been aware of them, they have done some Facebook and social media posts, but I personally don't use social media very much. But I believe they do it on Instagram and Facebook as well, and potentially even with yours when we had been aware that that passed through. So we have some opportunity to work on our website and link to you differently, which we're going to discuss in the next few weeks too. Thanks.
For Colorado Springs Utilities, first I just wanted to commend the PPACG staff for their efforts conducted to date. I think staff has made a lot of progress in a very short amount of time on Andy's staff, with Samantha coming on board and Jessica and Jenny's efforts. So just wanted to thank you for all of your time and effort putting together some initial communication materials and doing some initial outreach efforts for this year's summer ozone season. As we've indicated previously, we're committed to carrying messaging developed by PPACG forward to our workforce to educate them on ozone and what steps we all can do to ensure we have good air quality. We did that to a very limited respect this year. I think it was just kind of timing of things and staff coming on board and initial message development, but are really looking forward to leveraging that in 2020 and continuing our partnership with PPACG. And then one additional item, as we've mentioned during a prior Aqtc meeting, I think it was the June meeting, Colorado Springs Utilities did develop a voluntary procedure that was implemented during the 2019 summer ozone season, such that if CDPHE predicted our region to have elevated levels of ozone in their air quality index forecast, that we would make certain efforts to limit or reduce emissions of NOx from our electric units, given that NOx is one of the precursors to ozone formation. So we wound up implementing that procedure 3 times during the 2019 summer ozone season, and that's about all I can share about those particular events in that procedure, given the rules that govern the electric business. But really, we just saw this as us doing our small part to reduce emissions on those days that, in particular, were predicted to be elevated for ozone, but see that in the larger context of everyone's voluntary actions and just a continuation of our commitment to environmental stewardship. And as we've heard from the state subject matter experts previously, it'd probably be very difficult to attribute or apportion the benefit of any individual action taken for a region. And what's really more important to us is the sum total of all these actions. So lastly, I would just mention that while we were fortunate to have a fairly favorable meteorological conditions statewide for the summer ozone season, that might not be the case in future years. And as we can see from the Denver North Front Range non-attainment areas experiences, ozone really is going to take a coordinated and collective effort across multiple industries and sectors to address.
I'd like just to make a comment, if I may.
Sure.
I guess that's it. Lee Milner again. Thanks for the report, Chris. I was hoping for a little more detail, and maybe with the approval of people at CSU, that we had the 3 or I guess 4 dates or let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, actually five dates. It would be interesting to know, if it's not proprietary information, whether the environmental protocol that you used occurred on the dates where we had our highest readings, which were June 6th, July 24, August 7th, June 19th, and July 19th. So if that's not information that you can't share, it would be nice to know that you're picking the dates where we were getting close to exceedances. Thank you.
Okay. For those on Zoom, if there's anything you'd like to share in regards to actions that are done on Ozone Action Days. I'm not sure who's online anymore. That might be good to check. I might just be talking to myself. Oh, and it's just John that's on the line right now. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Are there any member entity announcements? We have 5 minutes left on the clock. Great. If there are any items that you would like to discuss at our next meeting, please let me know. Otherwise, I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you, everyone. Oh, yeah. Thank you, guys.